Hello, my name is Tyler Scheffner, and this is Akela's Den. Akela's Den is a coaching practice that I've been working on and building, and it's rooted in a bunch of different things. And mostly, it's rooted in sharing stories and telling stories and making sense of the stories that we hear, the stories that we carry, um, and processing through those things, and to dig a little bit deeper. And I have a tendency to really connect with a lot of different stories that I've created or stories that I've heard. Um, and some of these stories came from very personal places. So, one of the things that occurred to me today is that I woke up and I had this vision or this feeling, this instinct that I needed to look at some pictures. I needed to look at old pictures, pictures of my grandparents. And so I had gotten a album that my grandmother was passing on about 10 years before her death. She had kind of made these arrangements and started to identify people who would take over or take her things that were meaningful or held significance. So she would label them and then with the plan of giving those to people. And I remember she asked me, would you like these albums? Would you like the books of like the family story, family ancestry? And I was kind of blown away by that. It was a great honor, but also great responsibility to carry that on. And so I've had a lot of people reach out to me over the years and ask, can we see those books? Can we review them? And of course, I'm more than happy to do that. And yet I feel this responsibility for caretaking them. So as it was this morning, I woke up and I had this idea of like how I really need to like take a look at that. There was something pulling me in that direction. So I got out one of the albums and I started flipping through it. And as I was flipping through it, I got to like the third or fourth page, and it was a picture of my grandparents' wedding. And then the next page was the invitation to the dance reception for their wedding. And the date on it was September 28th, which happens to be today. So without knowing, I happened to get this idea that I should look at these pictures on the 82nd anniversary of my grandparents' wedding. And so those are the connections. Those are the little things that can pop up and show up in these kind of strange ways. And it really led me on to some reflections today. All throughout the day, I was reflecting on this. And as it was that I, was reflecting on this, it reminded me that there are stories that I'd like to share and I'd like to send out. And hopefully they find some meaning for other people. And so when I think about stories, I think about it in a couple of different ways. I think about it like we can tell our personal stories, but we can also tell stories that we hear. We can convey stories that held significance for others. And sometimes when we create our own stories or we write down stories that we're thinking about, we might gain some insights into ourselves and into making sense of the things around us. So a few years ago, I started writing, and I didn't really have a direction. I just started writing, and this was the story. I'm gonna share this. It's kind of the condensed version. It's not the full extent of the story that I have, but I wanted to share it to keep it kind of concise. So the story goes is that there was a wolf mother, and she had birthed 5 pups, and 3 of them were jet black, black as a moonless night sky. There was one that was gray, like spring storm clouds. And then there was the 5th, and the 5th one was yellow. It had a yellowish tint. It almost like dried corn stalks in late summer, early fall. The yellow pup was definitely the runt. It was weak and slow and kind of clumsy and falling over itself. And when the mother would invite them to come and eat, it was always that yellow pup that would be the last to arrive. It was often stumbling around and had difficulty latching on. And some of that sweet mother's milk would drip down its chin. And as these pups grew older, the yellow pup always was a little bit weaker. It was listless and less ambitious than the others. The other pups then began to play and learn how to hunt, and the yellow wolf would always find these excuses to stay back, to not engage. And after a while, the yellow pup just had kind of decided that it was better to be alone and to avoid playing with the others, to not compete. And a lot of that was out of the fear of being ridiculed or to be an outcast. In particular, to not be able to compare to their brothers and sister. But nothing could have been further from the truth. In fact, the other pups wanted the yellow pup to come and play. They loved their brother. But really, there was no amount of effort that could have convinced them. As you might imagine, the wolf's mother was concerned, and she sought out some guidance and went to the pack elders. And she talked about that. What am I doing wrong? What's the problem here? How can you help? And she wanted to know what she could do to help the wolf become a contributing member of the pack. And as it works in communities, some people listen, some don't, some kind of belittle, while others will try to offer some encouragement, maybe some guidance. But however hard the mother tried, few of her efforts seemed to help. One of the older wolves sought out the mother and shared his thoughts. And this is what he told her. He said, a mother's job is essentially to provide for the safety and the nourishment and provide that love. But some of the burdens that we feel like we carry are best left to others. And so what he said was, be his mother. Don't try to be more, just be his mother. And so it was that this would be the path for the yellow wolf. It was one that included avoidance and insecurity and a lot of fear. From time to time, some of the elder wolves would try to encourage the yellow wolf. They would offer a lesson. But the yellow wolf had stopped listening. And honestly, I believe their encouragement was insincere and condescending. There were those occasions when the fragile wolf would daydream about leaving the pack, running away, imagining some fantastical place. But he knew that in some ways there was a cowardice in the way he was thinking. And so he always stayed. And he knew that the pack was providing him with safety and security. So time passed, about 2 years. The litter mates were nearly fully grown. The 3 black wolves had become great hunters and were taking on more responsibilities within the pack. The gray wolf, the female, she learned to care for the younger wolves. But the yellow wolf didn't really have a role. He was often disappearing into the cave or trying to sleep and daydream. He was often pitying himself. And this was occurring while the others hunted and nurtured the others in the pack. So there was a few of the older wolves, the elder wolves, and they had heard of some of these behaviors before. And while they knew it would be difficult, they thought, we have to stop trying to engage the yellow wolf. For all the advice that we've offered had fallen on deaf ears. And so it was that when the elders would meet, they would discuss the fate of the yellow wolf. And it was at this point that one of the older wolves spoke up. And he said, I recall an old-timer once saying that a young wolf which is not contributing must be dealt with, and it must be done decisively. He continued, I seem to recall that there was an old rule. It was rarely needed, but nonetheless it was still established. I'll do my best to offer a summary. And he continued and said, in effect, upon the 3rd winter of the wolf's life, if a wolf does not contribute, the pack can no longer support that wolf. And it was with this that all the wolves in the room lowered their heads. They shook their heads and they pondered. This seemed like a harsh rule. It was at this point that the oldest of the wolves sat up, and he looked into the eyes of each participant in the room, and he said, These are hard rules to understand, and they should always be difficult to come to this. And I know that they'll be difficult to follow. But there is wisdom in doing what those before us have done. And so we should probably listen. So it was decided that the yellow wolf would be exiled. And this would be done in the upcoming autumn, where he'd be left to fend for himself, essentially becoming a lone wolf. So as it was, the summer months passed and the yellow wolf could feel the increasing isolation of the pack. From this point on, the elders rarely spoke to the wolf. Even the wolf's mother had become agitated and avoidant and angry. But these were all the signs of a grieving mother. And so it was with the arrival of the first cool autumn evening, the elders gathered the pack and summoned the yellow wolf. The yellow wolf was reluctant, but he approached. His head was slung low, his eyes looking down at the ground, his tail curled underneath his frail body. The elders wasted no time. They spoke directly, providing no opportunity for a rebuttal. And it had been decided the yellow wolf would be forced out of the pack. The pack members remained silent. They were sober and stoic. Not a single wolf spoke. All sat with their heads upright, facing the yellow wolf. All but the mother. She kept her head down, trying not to show her pain and suffering. But as you might recall, the yellow wolf had often imagined running away from the pack. For a minute, the yellow wolf thought about that. But he knew now that there was a seriousness to that reality. And the wolf began to change the way he was thinking. He was wondering, how can I possibly survive alone? With that, the yellow wolf exhaled deeply, stood up, and slowly began to walk away into the dark forest. As he reached the edge, he turned back, and all he wanted to do was look at his mother. But her head remained lowered. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. And with that, the yellow wolf slowly walked away and began to wander. His head down, always wanting to return, but knowing he would not be allowed back. And this went on for many days, many nights. And in fact, that wolf was afraid to stop. He was afraid to lay down. He just walked, and he walked, and he walked. And as so often happens when you walk, you think. And as he walked, he was thinking about the darkness, and he was thinking about his loneliness and his helplessness. And he had known all of those feelings before, but never happening at the same time. And he felt despair. You see, there's a interesting thing, though, in nature. There's this unique relationships that exist. And sometimes seemingly random animals have these relationships that we as humans really don't understand. They often serve kind of mutually beneficial resources. And there's one such relationship that exists between the wolf and the raven. You see, the wolf provides food for the scavenging bird, while the raven provides vision and security. Some have observed that the wolves and the ravens will even play together. Of course, this is when they assume that there's no men watching. And so one might imagine that the relationship between the wolf and the raven is even more complex than just about food and security. And perhaps it's this detail that might explain the next part of our story. Many nights had passed, and that yellow wolf had found very little. He stumbled across some bones of a deer carcass. There was very little meat left, but there was still some cartilage, and he provided just enough to keep the wolf nourished. And without sleep and food, the yellow wolf was in a deep fog, not really sure what to do or where to go or even how to begin to survive. And so it was one afternoon that he returned to that carcass, and as he was lowering his head to take a bite, at this point just gnawing on bones, he heard the caw of a raven. And as he chewed on those bones, he thought to himself, perhaps I could catch that raven and I could eat it. But the ravens, they're sharp. And the raven sensed this intention. And so he perched on a branch just above the deer carcass. He was carefully observing, and he was waiting for the wolf to grab a bone. And as the wolf began to gnaw on the bones, the raven cawed loudly. And the irritated wolf began to growl. But the raven persisted, and he cawed louder and louder. And the wolf kept his eyes down and chewing and pulling on the remnants of this deer, all the while trying to ignore the raven's squawking. It was then that the raven took flight and dove directly at the wolf and nipped its ear with its sharp beak. He grabbed a clump of fur. The wolf snapped his jaws, feeling the pain of the bite, but completely missed the raven. And as the wolf looked up, he saw some movement in a thicket. He stopped and he crouched down. The raven begins to caw again, spitting out the little clump of fur from the wolf. And the yellow wolf could feel it. He was nervous. Hair on the back of his neck was standing up. And he couldn't make sense of why. Should he run or stand his ground? And as he's doing that, out of the forest lumbers a massive bear, bounding towards the wolf. The raven's cawing intensifies and plunges toward the backside of the bear, pecking its rump. The bear turned to swat at the raven, and in that moment, the yellow wolf turns and flees into the forest. He began to run faster than he's ever run in his life, and ran for several miles. And it was only out of exhaustion that he stopped and he lays down. And for a few seconds, he's laying there, exhausted, when he begins to hear the beating of the raven's wings. The raven lands just above the wolf and begins to caw. Again, the wolf is initially irritated with this, but he notices that the caw is different. It's got a different tone to it. There's something calm about it, almost inquisitive. The raven's vocalizations begin to change, mimicking various sounds of the forest. At times he sounds like a cricket, other times other birds. He even makes sound that sound like the wind. The raven tilts his head and he begins to blink, hopping from branch to branch, eventually settling on the one closest to the wolf. And as you might imagine, the wolf is intrigued by this behavior. The raven's alert, and he's compulsively looking left to right, and then up and down. The wolf begins to tilt his head, and he's replaying all the events that just occurred. And he begins to think, Raven saved me. He warned me of the bear. And with that, the wolf lays down. For the first time since being exiled, He's able to sleep soundly. And he knows that Raven is keeping watch. And so this continues, and time passes. The wolf begins to wander the forest, and Raven is always nearby, assisting and offering his eyesight. And as time passes, the yellow wolf learns to hunt small game, initially with pheasants and rabbits and an occasional lame fawn. And when absolutely necessary, finds things to scavenge. And he's also aware that he needs to let Raven join him. And while he picks at the bones, Raven will come and pick with him. And as this goes on over time, something very surprising happens. The wolf begins to notice that he can understand some of the vocalizations. And so it's at this point that we begin to hear the voice of Raven. And so what does the Raven have to say? Keep your eyes up. Move slowly. Keep knowing. The wolf stops and looks up and asks, keep knowing? Raven states, yes, knowing, trusting, sensing, believing. This confuses the wolf, and he whispers to himself, this bird is crazy. With a wry look, the Raven says, nothing. I'm just a bird repeating words that I once heard. Please pay no attention to me. And the wolf slinks back down and regains his focus. He's stalking a fat turkey. It's then that the Raven asks, what are the consequences of your failures? The wolf is annoyed by the question, and he doesn't answer. But Raven persists. Do you believe you'll catch what you were seeking? With that, the yellow wolf snaps. Will you please stop? I'm trying to focus. Ravens are never short on rebuttals. And he asks, focus on what exactly? And with that, the wolf responds, the hunt. But Raven had already plotted his response. And he said something insightful. But you already know how to hunt. You're a wolf, are you not? The wolf paused and looks down in frustration. What is that supposed to mean? I don't know. Am I a wolf? Raven tilts his head and says, you don't know if you're a wolf. I don't know what it means to be a wolf. I've never felt like the others. And what do the others feel like? Asked Raven. What do you mean? Raven replies, I mean, how do you know what the other wolves felt like? Did you ever ask them? Did you listen to them? Try to understand them? The young wolf hesitates. I just know. Nothing's ever as hard for them. They just knew how to be wolves. Raven responds, oh, I see. So your feelings told you that you're special. You can sense how other people's felt without even asking them. Yeah, I've heard of wolves like you. You're one of those magical mind readers. The young wolf was gnashing his teeth, turned to Raven and stares directly into those black, beady eyes. And Raven stopped, and without flinching, returns that stare. The only movement is that of the wind blowing his black feathers. Raven even leans in, getting closer to the wolf. His eyes seem to be deepening, getting darker, and he speaks sternly. Young wolf, do you know why they call a group of ravens an unkindness? The wolf felt small and humbled. He's trying not to show his insecurity. And Raven continues, It's because we are the truth sayers. We do not say what others want to hear, but rather what one needs to hear, even when it hurts, especially when it exposes a petty fragility. Raven flies down directly in front of the young wolf, close enough to be eaten, and he looks up at the yellow wolf, tilts his head, and he says, "The truth is, you are not special, just as I am not, nor is that fat turkey, which, by the way, just got away, which makes that turkey very much alive and fortunate, but she is not special either. None of the things you feel should be trusted. Long ago, you sensed you were different from the others. You began to create a story that validated what was different about you and therefore separated yourself from the others. When all made efforts to comfort you, support you, accept you, guide you, you rejected them. I will repeat that. You rejected them. The wolf feels the heat of anger beginning to boil inside. But there was something about that tilt of the raven's black head that solicited another feeling. This one was in the pit of his belly. It was sadness and grief. And with that, the wolf imagines the face of his mother and his kinmates, and he feels a sharp pain in his chest. It's hard to breathe. There's a tightness clutching his entire body. Raven never loses eye contact, and he speaks softly. I am sorry to bear this news, young brother wolf. You were not abandoned by the pack, but you also could not be served by the pack. For the turmoil of your mind would have persisted and caused deeper harm to you and the others. You see, the pack had some old rules, recognizing that some wolves need to be alone to sort out their purpose. It's often in the wisdom of the ancestors that many difficult decisions get made. The yellow wolf lowers his head, turns and walks away without a word. He's walking, and his mind's in a fog. But he senses he needs to move more, and he begins to trot. His long wolf legs stretching out, and he increases his speed. Before long, he's in a full sprint. There are no thoughts, just instincts. Raven is flying behind, but keeping a distance. The young wolf rapidly approaches a steep, rocky cliff and abruptly stops. Without thought, a deep, guttural howl emerges from his chest, passing through his mouth while lifting his head to the darkening sky. His eyes are closed, with tears flowing down his cheeks. The primal sound resonates through him and echoes through the valley below. A few minutes pass. The yellow wolf is exhausted, and that's when he hears it. The sounds of wolves, far off in the distance, returning his call. And for the first time, the yellow wolf feels his body dislodged from his mind. As the raven approaches, the wolf turns and greets him. Raven perches on the back of the wolf and whispers in his ear, "Remember this feeling. It will go away. Your work is never done. The demons of your mind will return and harass you. You must trust those instincts. Listen to the spirits within you. Follow your soul. They will help you remember that you are a wolf." And with that, the raven takes flight. And in the moonlight, the yellow wolf shines gold. So that's the story. That story came from a lot of different places. And there's more to it, but I wanted to share that. And just remember, as we're walking through life, that we're surrounded by stories. And it's what we do with those stories that matters. So thank you for listening.